Good morning and welcome to Frank's School. This is at Frank's School. It's the 6-year, 171st day, fourth video of four, and this is supposed to be a lightning talk. This is my fourth one for the DegrowUS Conference in Chicago 2008. You know, I think I'm going to erase stuff as I talk about it now because this really is quite a mess and I could easily get lost. This, as this is going on, as I'm doing this right now, as I'm uploading it, I think the lightning talks are going to be going on in Chicago. I couldn't make it there, so I don't even know if this will be uploaded in time. But maybe that's just as well, because this has more to do with, I think, the way they scheduled it is always a cat fight. They were going to discuss about a plan of action. I think that was dedicated for Sunday, I think. Anyway, here's a plan of action. And I call it Peace and War, an allusion to Tolstoy's War and Peace, of course. Peace and War. Let's start with the peace. Woodstock, August 16th, 2019. I knew this was going to happen, obviously, and it already has begun to happen, that people are planning to celebrate the 50-year anniversary of Woodstock of 1969. Michael Lang is the name. If you just go in there and Google it, you'll come up with his name at Bethel Park, I think it is, New York. Fine, that's good. I knew it was going to happen, but I'm a little bit harsh about this here. I say, well, but instead of it being a weekend, that was to be a weekend of peace, a weekend of peace and music. Well, make it a year of peace and music. Give peace a chance. Even though time is so incredibly short, we in the degrowth community are so painfully aware of that. There are many of the older guys like me that have just given up. But what are young people going to do? In spite of that, give it a year. Give it a year of peace and music. But I would say, regarding this, I would make it a decentralized event, not centralized. I mean, Woodstock, I never would have gone. I mean, I'm a decentralist. And for 250,000 people to all gather into one field, to me, that's just horrendous. And I mean, they can have it. But in a decentralized way, all over the U.S., all over the world, Woodstock could be celebrated. But the thing is, the two generations since then have done worse than failed. They failed. We failed, and our children failed. And it was worse than that. We made, you know, instead of getting back to the garden, all that optimism and stuff like that, what have we done? I mean, there were successes, absolutely, to come out of the 1960s and 70s to some extent. The incredible accomplishments in terms of, well, you know what they are. But we did not. We haven't gotten back to the garden. We're not even heading back to the garden, really. So we have failed. But give it a chance. I mean, give it a year. But if that goes by, and there is still as little hope as there seems to be at the moment, then war. In the summer of 2020, there are going to be political conventions in the U.S., the Democratic and the Republican political conventions. It's going to be a charged time no matter what. Also, I think this very weekend they're going to be talking about and trying to plan an international degrowth conference in the United States in 2020, the 2-year time that it would come around, time for another one. Well, at that time, I think someone or the group has to decide, should we pull the trigger on this? Should we declare war? You could think of it as the Gaia War if you wanted to. You know, there's, I think of Life of Brian, where if you've ever seen that movie, where they sit around and they talk about, oh, we got to do something, and they talk and they talk and they talk, and that one woman says, but you don't do anything. And then finally Brian goes out and writes on the wall in bad Latin, Romans go home. I'm thinking about that a little bit. I mean, after a year's time, if still nothing is done, it's time to do something, and to get violent. And you might say, well, that's not nice. Yeah, but it's not nice what's happening to Gaia, and it's worth a war. So should the trigger be pulled? And if the trigger is pulled, here's a way that it could be pulled. That some people might say, oh, such destruction, or others might say, what's salvation? Crystal night. I think that, I don't know how it's translated into English, but you know what I'm talking about. That horrible event in Germany where stuff was smashed and so many synagogues burnt and people killed, and broken glass is why it's called the Kristallnacht, I think is what it is in German. Well, maybe it won't have to happen. Hopefully it would not be necessary, but maybe the fear of it alone could be enough. Pole lights, street lights, not traffic lights, because the purpose would not be to hurt people. The purpose would actually be salvation, not destruction. Smash them, shoot them. And if that, and that no doubt won't be enough. I would say before this would happen, you could try a slowdown. I mean, if people just decided, look, we're just going to drive on the interstates at 20 miles an hour. That would slow, this would in effect make the world go diurnal, or humanity go diurnal again. The days wouldn't really be changed very much by that. It would just be humans would once again become diurnal. I think of the song, Hello Darkness, My Old Friend. It's nice to see you once again. Well, darkness, that old friend, would be there. The Sound of Silence, I think, is the name of that song. And once again, especially with this, the sound of silence would be there. And it doesn't really have to harm a soul. And if you don't like shooting, I mean, this country is so full of guns, and, you know, from marksmen from a long distance could take care of the pole lights real quick, and other stuff as well. I mean, I'm talking about a violent act, but not one that would injure or kill. It would just sort of save. You know, it's a little scary talking about this, but nonetheless, I think that idea has to be floated out there. And maybe, as I've said before, I hope it would not be necessary, but maybe the fear of that alone could have some effect on those political conventions, on that election coming up. Remind or show people that the grip is tenuous, that this modern destructive culture has on the world. It's tenuous. It can be broken quite easily. In Ecotopia emerging, Ecotopia is that utopia about the secession of the Pacific Northwest. That was not easy. This is a sequel, and I haven't read it. But how that was accomplished, it required a war. I think it was called a helicopter war. This is fiction now. But part of it also, if I recall, was the mining of the cities. They talked about it. They said the cities have been mined with atomic weapons. Mined. And I think it's not established whether that ever happened or not within the fictional world. But the fear of that alone was effective. All right, so maybe not necessary, but there is a plan. It would, in effect, it would be secession. Secession is absolutely possible, but it doesn't have to be one particular state or city or village seceding from, say, the United States. There can be a cultural secession, saying, no, we're out of here. And how is that done? By very universal voluntary simplicity. I think of the Dokobors, I think they were called in Russia, that ended up finally going to Canada. All right. Well, and if that weren't enough to add to that fear to make people think, you could say, hey, that's just a shot across the bow of the transformers and gas stations. Bye for now.